I'm basically just saying this every year at this point, but 2025 really has been another crazy year for paddle releases. And today I've come up with the top 5 best paddles of 2025. Yeah, this is going to be controversial. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets Runners. So 2024 was Gen 3 year. Really, it was just a bunch of power paddles that everyone liked until all the flaws came out. 2025 was the year where we sort of regressed to the mean in terms of the balance between control and power, although it is still fairly obvious that power is a main point of emphasis when brands develop a paddle. It makes sense, speeding up the game does give good players an edge, and every brand's going to try and push the needle in terms of top-end performance. Even Selkirk got involved this year, a company who has historically always been fighting for control. But still, we got some much more balanced paddles this year, and this top 5 shows that you can still be good for power without sacrificing the other important parts of pickleball. Most of these paddles are very well rounded. Now, this was a difficult list to come up with, but I actually think it was easier this year than it has been in the past. Especially the top 3. I think we're pretty clearly the best 3 paddles I've played with this year. That does actually bring me to an important piece of criteria that I have to outline every time I make one of these lists. Of course, I'm only talking about the paddles that we carry at the store. That does limit me a little bit. There are some paddles that I've heard are very good, but I can't talk about them because we don't sell them and I haven't gotten a chance to play with them. So if there's a paddle that you think should be included because you play with it and you think it's excellent, that's probably why. The other thing is I'm only including paddles that came out in 2025 or very late in 2024. But that's about it for the criteria. Pretty much everything else goes. Just a quick reminder that while I do try and be as objective as possible with these lists, of course, they are still my personal opinion. So if you do disagree, just let me know in the comments and we can debate. Also, as usual, just a reminder that any of the paddles I talk about on this channel, you can check out on our website, racketsandrunners.ca. Also, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me in the store on Instagram, and let me know in the comment section what you want me to cover next. So I'm going to get right into number 5 now, and I just wanted to say this 5th spot is the one I struggled with the most. There are some paddles that definitely could have made it here, especially if we're talking about paddles that are similar to the one I picked. The SLK Era Power and the Gearbox Pro Ultimate are the ones that come to mind. That kind of gives a big hint for what I've got at number 5. You guessed it, it's the Joola Pro 4. The one I'm holding here is the Perseus 16, but you can pick from whatever model you want. Actually, throughout this video, I'm not going to be talking about one specific shape in a line. No shape is technically better than another, it just might work better for a certain play style, and the Perseus is the one that I play best with. But anyways, the Joola Pro 4s were very, very important paddles this year because they were Joola's answer to all the issues they had with their Gen 3s in 2024. For those of you who don't know, Joola made their original Gen 3s, which were eventually delisted for being too powerful. Then they released the Mod TAs, which were sort of a stopgap for their pros to play with something legal. Then they made their 3S models, which were only UPAA approved, so not really a legitimate option for players who want to enter a USAP tournament. Long story short, their 3rd generation paddles in 2024 weren't really a viable option anymore because they were too powerful. That's why they released the Pro 4, to make a Gen 3 paddle that was within the legal power limits, and it is, but that also raises the question, this is a Gen 3. So many Gen 4s have come out, so what is an older generation paddle doing on this list? Well, that's because as good as Gen 4s are, and don't worry, there will be plenty on this list, but they haven't yet rendered Gen 3s totally obsolete for a few very important reasons. The main playability characteristic that separates this paddle from Gen 4s is its feel and dwell time. The Pro 4s provide incredible ball feedback with a really long dwell time, which is typical of Gen 3s. This allows players to dial themselves into a paddle better, or at least differently to how they do it on a Gen 4, and especially advanced players love this unique feel. A lot of pros haven't moved on from Gen 3s yet, in large part because that higher feedback is incredibly addictive, and in comparison, Gen 4s feel much more muted and a little bit dead. The other thing about this paddle is that it's still very much elite for power and spin. Power might not reach the same consistently high levels of the most powerful Gen 4s, but it's still more than competitive. And then for spin, because of the longer dwell time and the more connected feel, the Pro 4 allows you to shape the ball a little bit more effectively, almost like you can grab it and throw it. This is particularly useful in the soft spin game, a part of pickleball that has become extremely important, again, especially at a high level. Gen 3s like the Pro 4 just seem to give a little bit more fine-tuned control over their ball compared to Gen 4s. Now, of course, there are some downsides to a Gen 3 compared to a Gen 4, and that's why this paddle only comes in at number 5. For one, the sweet spot is much smaller than it is on the rest of the paddles on this list, and that's true of most Gen 3s compared to Gen 4s. But that's also part of why they feel so good. A smaller sweet spot generally means a more well-defined feel in the sweet spot, but they're not as forgiving, which is a big part of why they are tougher to use in the control game. The other thing is durability. Gen 3s have honeycomb cores, so they break in and break down much quicker than Gen 4s, and that's something that, unless you're a pro and you can get a new paddle whenever you want, makes Gen 4s objectively better. Now I'll quickly touch on why I have the Pro 4 here instead of the Era Powers and the Gearbox Pro Ultimate. To me, Joola paddles have always had slightly better feel than their competition. This is an intangible that doesn't necessarily show up on a spec sheet, but I do feel more connected to the ball here than I do on those other paddles, and because that's such an important part of your experience with a Gen 3, that's why I consider it the best. But I can't put it any higher than 5th because I do think that Gen 4s have pushed the needle of performance a little bit farther at this point, so now let's move on to number 4. This is where this list is going to become very subjective. I do think first place is a lock, but 2, 3, and 4 are interchangeable depending on the type of player you are. Coming in at number 4, I actually have two paddles, the J2NF and the J2FC+. This was a tough one for me, and when I see these paddles only coming in at number 4, I feel a little bad because they're so darn good, but that just shows you how competitive this list was this year, and honestly, this is probably the most personal preference call of all of them. The reason I've only got these in at 4 is more because I'm not the biggest fan of hybrid paddles, so take that with a grain of salt. The other question is, why do I have both the NF and the FC Plus here? Well, that's because I really do see these two paddles as equal in terms of how good they are. The only determining factor if you're trying to choose between these two paddles is whether you want more control or more power. The J2 FC Plus is a true controlled Gen 4, which we're actually seeing a little bit less of nowadays. We're getting more of these powerful Gen 4s like the NF I'm about to talk about. But this is really in the spirit of what a Gen 4 was meant to be. Full foam core, there is a springier foam on the outside here, but it really doesn't add that much power. The main quality of this paddle is softness and a really big sweet spot. It soaks up a lot of the ball during impact, meaning you have more time to guide it into the kitchen. And because it has that big sweet spot, it's stable and playable all over the paddle face, making it even more forgiving in the soft game. Whether it's for dinking, but also for drops and resets, where you're more prone to mistakes because they're harder shots, everything is just that little bit easier with this paddle. Now, it doesn't lack power. Most Gen 4s, even the most controlled ones like this, still pack a decent punch. But if you want a more powerful take on this design, that's when you go for the NF. The NF is a much more powerful paddle because it has more trampoline effect. It was actually one of the first Gen 4s I tested that felt like this. Now we have a lot more of these more powerful Gen 4s, but whether it's on serves, drives, hand battles, the NF is the type of paddle that helps you out. Of course, that comes with more risk in the soft game. This is more prone to pop-ups than the FC Plus, and during my test, I actually did play better with the FC Plus. But that's the beauty of these more powerful Gen 4s. They are still very easy to control. Most of that comes down to the massive sweet spot. They are still just as stable and playable outside of the sweet spot as the super controlled Gen 4s. So once you soften up those hands and figure out the power level you need to keep the ball in the kitchen, you won't really struggle. That's what separates this from something like the Pro 4 I was just talking about. It's leaps and bounds more forgiving in terms of sweet spot, and that's an important playability characteristic for control. You just don't have to be as perfect with paddles like this. And on that theme of a bigger sweet spot, that's something that these J2 shapes from Honolulu Pickleball are exceptionally good at. I've talked about this before, but the paddle face comes down a little bit lower and wider down here, which expands the sweet spot compared to the more standard hybrid shapes. So these paddles are just the cream of the crop for sweet spot size. That does come at the expense of some hand speed and whippiness, but these are still hybrid paddles. They're not slow by any stretch of the imagination. Actually, Honolulu has a similar, wider, just larger design on their J6 paddles, but I have to say, these suffer a lot more from that slow hand speed, just because elongated paddles are fairly sluggish to begin with. I will be reviewing those, or at least comparing them to some other paddles soon, by the way, but yeah, the J2 FC Plus and NF are just really great takes on the Gen 4 core construction. And if you did play with the original J2K, this is a logical step forward with more control on the FC Plus and more power on the NF. Okay, now moving on to number 3, we have what might be my favorite value paddle of the year. It's not cheap, but it has similar top-end performance compared to much more expensive paddles. It's the Breadandbut Loco. Now I'm holding the Elongated because that's my favorite one, but you can't go wrong with any of them. In fact, that is part of the beauty with the Loco, is that it comes in all 3 shapes. Most brands will make 1 or 2 shapes with the same core construction, but Breadandbut said, nah, we're gonna make all 3, elongated, hybrid, and wide body. And that's great because that means pretty much everyone can play with one of these paddles. Now the Loco is very much a power Gen 4. I need to make that clear. So what I just said about the NF in terms of poppiness and risk factor in the control game applies here. In fact, the Locos are even more powerful than the NF. Obviously, more power is great for the modern fast-paced game, and that's just it. The amount of power these generate is more along the lines of something like a Boomstick, which you obviously have to pay much more money for. The other thing I love about the Loco is the feel and the dwell time. Now, it still feels like a Gen 4. It's got a more instantaneous entry and exit point, and it's relatively muted, but compared to other Gen 4s, it's less of that. It does have a slightly grabbier, crisper feel to it, which is a big part of the reason why I'm such a big fan. I just love a good feel, and I think this feel really helps the Loco in the spin game. Like I was saying with the Pro 4, more feel and dwell time means you can shape the ball a little bit more effectively, both for spin-on drives and for soft spin, and that helps make these paddles very well-rounded, which helps you add more variety into your game. I played some of my best pickleball while testing the Locos. They complement my drivey style, and I felt confident in the soft spin game. And of course, they are still Gen 4, so they're relatively forgiving in the control game, at least for how powerful they are. So blending the benefits of a Gen 4 with the best feel and grabbiness you can get in this category of paddles makes these paddles probably my favorite right now. At least my favorite paddles under 400 Canadian dollars. And I really want to stress, you do still get those benefits in terms of sweet spot size and forgivingness here. I think the elongated and the hybrid do require some customization to be on the same level as paddles like the NF and the FC Plus, but these still have big sweet spots and really decent control. So just a really good take on a powerful Gen 4 design. The Locos show how far we've come in terms of variety and well-rounded playability when designing a powerful paddle, so great work to Breadandbut there. Alright, so coming in at number 2, we have a paddle that I actually really didn't like when I first tested it back in February. It's the Carbon TruFoam Genesis, and again, pick whichever shape you want. I usually go with the Carbon one, but they're all great, especially the 4, which is a really unique take on a hybrid paddle. But anyways, yes, I did not like these paddles when I initially tested them. The reason for that is that this was the first Gen 4 paddle I tested, so it introduced me to this new generation of playability and the flaws I associate with it. The biggest problem for me was the feel. Coming from Gen 3s where I'd gotten so used to that long springy dwell time with so much feedback, this just felt incredibly muted, very bland, and I couldn't really develop a connection to the ball. Now that I've played with so many Gen 4s and gotten used to them, this is just par for the course and it's not really an issue anymore. But again, just wanted to put that out there. Gen 4s aren't perfect and they're not gonna be for everyone. What made me quickly do a full 180 on the Genesis was customization. As soon as I added weight, especially on the sides here, well, that completely transformed the paddle. The feel is never gonna be crisp like a Gen 3, but it does become livelier with weight. And then you get all the other benefits. The Genesis has, in true Gen 4 fashion, a massive sweet spot. This full foam core is so much more flexible than honeycomb, so when you hit the ball off center, that foam is still working to pocket the ball. It took a bit of time for me to get used to the feel, but once I did, I realized how much more forgiving this design is, and I started playing some very good pickleball. The other thing with the Genesis is that this is very much an elite control paddle. It doesn't have an EVA foam ring like a lot of the newer Gen 4s, so it doesn't pop the ball out. Instead, it gives you a pretty plush feel that's extremely forgiving and really does help you drop the ball. Drop the ball in a good way, not in a bad way, like you drop it into the kitchen. But what the Genesis really revolutionized was that, yes, this is an elite control paddle, but unlike control paddles that came before Gen 4s, it also has top tier spin, especially soft spin. And honestly, that soft spin is still what separates it from some of the newer Gen 4s. I bring this paddle out to all my playtests now, and especially when I was testing it against the Loco, it was very obvious that this paddle had quite a bit more spin variety. Because the dwell time is longer and it doesn't shoot the ball out as hard, it gives you more time to shape it and play low percentage spin shots. And I always feel like I'm a more well-rounded player when I pick this up. Now, I'm not saying it's a point blank better paddle than the Loco, Loco and other more powerful Gen 4s, but it's a different experience, and I do think a lot of players could benefit from a more control-oriented paddle like this. Like I said, I play some of my best pickleball with the Genesis because it almost forces me to focus more on control than power, and that's still where the biggest skill gap is in this sport. But the other thing is, it's not like it lacks that much power. What's unique about the Genesis is that it's 15 millimeters thick, so when you accelerate it, it still has decent pop. So the option to play with power is there, it just, again, has more variety than most paddles. And then of course, because it is thinner than average, it's got really good hand speed, that's just a bonus. But yeah, the Genesis for me is a bit of a unicorn in pickleball right now. I don't think any other Gen 4 has this level of control with this much well-rounded playability. But now moving on to number 1, we've seen a lot of very good paddles come out this year, but in the end, this was a very easy decision for me. The best paddle of 2025 is the Selkirk Boomstick. Now I know not everyone likes this paddle for a couple of reasons. One, it's really expensive, and two, it's ridiculously powerful, and you're always gonna have some people pushing back on that in pickleball. But I think if we're being as objective as possible, there really isn't a better paddle in pickleball right now. I mean, it just is what it is. As a reviewer, sometimes you test things that are a cut above the rest, and that's exactly it with the Boomstick. It is by far the best pickleball paddle that I've ever tested, at least. The most notable characteristic here is, of course, power. It's got insane pop and power from the baseline. It's just automatic in the power game, and yes, it is more powerful than the next level of powerful Gen 4s. But its playability goes way beyond that, starting with control. It's not a soft paddle, but it is one of, if not the most consistent paddles. And because of that, if you have somewhat soft hands, you will be completely fine in the control game. The Boomstick has by far the biggest sweet spot I've ever felt on any pickleball paddle. It's so big that you don't feel any noticeable drop off in performance outside the sweet spot, even on the edges here. And I can't stress how important that is in the control game. To be able to miss-hit a drop, a reset, or even a dink and still have it go where you want it to is insanely overpowered, and no other paddle on the market does that. The spin is also off the charts. While it doesn't have the longest dwell time, it does still grab the ball, not like a Gen 3, but in a way where you can shape it almost as effectively. And then there's nothing that competes with it for top-end spin, and that combination of power and spin is just ridiculous. Honestly, sometimes it feels unfair. You get depth and action on the ball that you almost shouldn't be able to get on a pickleball paddle. Now, feel is still fairly muted like most Gen 4s, but that's almost irrelevant. The whole point of good feel is to help you get dialed into a paddle to eliminate your mistakes. But this is so forgiving thanks to its big sweet spot that you don't really make that many mistakes. You could look at hand speed as a downside if you want. Because of the weight on the sides here, neither the Elongated or the Widebody are particularly quick for their shapes, but I also don't think these are slow paddles. And other than that, it's the best paddle I've tried, and while it does come at a premium price, it's up to the other brands to try and match this playability at more affordable price points if they can. That's just it. Selkirk can charge what they want, I guess, because no other paddle really comes close. Now, would I play with this when a Loco offers enough power and spin and all that? Well, that depends. If I want to win a tournament, yeah, this is what I'm buying. My odds are just higher with this. I probably wouldn't buy it if I was just playing casually, but if you can afford it and you want the best, this is it. It's as simple as that. I know not everyone's gonna like that, but that's okay. It's not like we're lacking quality paddles right now. Any of the paddles on this list are excellent. It's not like you have to look at the Boomstick at number 1 and be like, well, I gotta get that. It's just a great paddle. I know that's a little bit controversial, but that does wrap up this top 5. It's been a great 2025, hopefully more of the same in 2026. But anyways, thank you so much for watching, and remember that if you want to demo any of these paddles, you can come visit us in store, or if you want to buy them, you can go online at racketsandrunners.ca.